In a relationship, when is honesty not the best policy? How do you balance what you want versus what you need? And is there something you need to say to your spouse but can't find the right way to say it? If so, then you're in the right place. This is the Lunch with Sandy podcast. With nearly 20 years of marriage under their belts, Terrence and Sandy Jackson discuss a range of topics, provide valuable insights on relationships, and talk about the conversations married couples need to have. So what does lunch have to do with all of this? Well, it's a metaphor for how these conversations originally started. Speaking of conversations, let's get one going. Here's your hosts, Terrence and Sandy.
Welcome to the Lunch with Sandy podcast. I'm Terrence.
And I'm Sandy.
And as always, we are having the conversations that married couples need to have. Sandy.
Yes.
I got beef with you. Or that's what I would say if I actually did have beef with you. So let me ask you a question. Do you think when couples have issues, they're as open as I just was when I said I had beef with you?
Well, let me be open to start and say, I don't think the kids use beef anymore.
Fortunately for you, we're not talking to kids.
So, but no, not all the time. Maybe some of the time, depending on the topic, I would say.
Well, that's what I want to discuss today. I want to discuss conflict, in particular, conflict avoidance techniques and versus conflict resolution techniques. How's that sound?
Sounds good. I know which one I like.
Yeah, so that leads me to the question that I was about to ask you. When it comes to conflict, do you feel that you fall more on the side of avoidance versus the resolution side?
Well, I think avoidance is always the easier one, that fight or flight, kick it in. But I think I've gotten better with doing less avoidance and doing more of the resolution. What do you think?
The reality is a lot of people avoid conflict because they just don't like confrontation. But conflict can be good for a marriage. Mm-hmm. And I say that because it provides an opportunity for growth. Well,
either that, or I think sometimes there are people who don't have good role models in their home to see what a conflict resolution conversation, like how it transpires, and hence they don't even know how to approach it. So like, why bother going through it? Let's just avoid it.
True. The issue with avoidance, though, is avoidance can cause real issues in your marriage.
Oh, definitely. No disagreement there.
Because when there's a situation that needs to be discussed and you avoid that situation, that tends to build up.
Yeah.
And then,
That's my favorite. Just let it build until you explode. That's the easiest one, I think.
Yeah, but avoidance can have a negative impact on an actual relationship.
Yes.
So first, I want to talk about some signs that someone is avoiding conflict. And I'm going to be honest, there are some of these, that I use. And it's not that avoiding is always a bad thing. I'm going to give you an example of when I avoid conflict. And it might not be conflict between me and someone else. It might be conflicts between others that are in the room.
Yeah.
I have this famous phrase. And listen, this is trademarked.
Yep.
There's juice boxes in the refrigerator.
That is trademarked.
For those for those of you who don't know, when stuff starts popping off or people start getting into a conflict, I tend to redirect. I redirect or I distract with that phrase, there's juice boxes in the refrigerator.
Yeah, that's probably the favorite of yours.
Yes, that is. So I do tend to redirect the conversation with there are juice boxes in the refrigerator, and it throws everybody off. Mm-hmm. And before you know it, whatever the discussion was or whatever the issue was, it's an afterthought.
Well, the escalation tends to detracted, and then it's not as escalated.
True.
Because they're like, what did he just say?
And there are juice boxes in the refrigerator.
They look at you, they give it a minute, and then whatever it is that they were going to continue arguing about it's not always at the forefront of the mind.
It's mind games.
Yep.
Now, the crazy thing is, as of recent, I've learned that there are different types of juice boxes. There are now adult juice boxes that I did not know about. And
The mommy juice box.
So when I say there are juice boxes in the refrigerator, I'm talking about Capri Sun and all that other stuff. I wasn't talking about, I don't even know what they're called.
Just kind of call it wine in a box.
Wine in a box. Wine in a box. Now, for you,
Yes.
I know one of your avoidance techniques, the silent treatment.
Yeah. And just walk away
Yes.
and hold it in.
And you hold it in. Now, when you hold it in, what happens?
It continues to compound, and then it'll be one small insignificant thing that will set everything off. That
The
will
straw
go
that
back
broke
like
the
a
camel's
month.
back. And so with that silent treatment, there's two things that's happening there, right? There's the silent treatment, and the danger with that is you don't deal with the issue right away.
Yeah.
Things start to compound, and all it takes is someone not closing the door, or someone not putting the toilet seat down, and it's like Hiroshima.
Yes.
The other thing that does too is when the issue comes up and you use the silent treatment, it actually delays the conversation.
Definitely.
Now, the trouble with delaying the conversation is when you come back to the conversation, memory is not what it used to be. You're not spring chickens anymore.
What are you talking about? Mine's 100% on point.
So when you have to recall the events, because the whole thing with conflict
It's
is
not fresh anymore.
Yeah, it's not fresh anymore. And to really try to resolve it, you have to have a conversation. And again, it's not about who is right or wrong, but in order to present how you felt at that time, or you have to be able to correctly recollect those thoughts. And as time goes on, I think it gets a bit more difficult to do so.
Yeah. It's probably still a good one of mine to hold on to, because, when I get angry, I just want to lash out at people. Of course, I'm better now, but
You're a work in progress.
yeah, definitely.
I mean, we're all a work in progress.
Just I'm the bigger one.
Yes,
But
she is.
but at the same time, when maybe not so much with you, but when I get angry and I just want to lash out, like, I don't care if I hurt your feelings. And that's also not a
not
good
healthy.
situation to be in. You got me upset. Now I just want to hurt you back, So
Let's
sometimes,
stop all the hurt. Let's start the healing.
so sometimes I don't think, walking away is always a bad idea, but maybe coming back to it much sooner and not wait a month.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. There are some people who just pretend that an issue doesn't exist. it just like that just didn't happen.
Right.
And I've seen that where I've watched something explode.
Yes.
Shrapnel all throughout the room. And people just don't move. They just pretend like it just didn't happen.
Yeah. A little PTSD from shrapnel.
The way you're laughing sounds like you might
No, I know who is the prime person of that technique, but we won't get into the names.
I'm not using I'm just using hypotheticals.
Yeah.
here.
Oh yes, definitely. If, does what's the disclaimer that it may
we ain't trying to break up nobody's happy homes. There's rules of engagement here. We shall not break those rules.
Yeah.
Don't break up a happy home, Sandy.
No, I'm not trying to, but you're right. Yeah. And then just it's over and done, and you just there's never any resolution, I feel like, because they just, whatever. They drop the bomb, walk away, and
just
just move on with their
leave
life.
the pieces all over the place.
Yeah, they don't care about the pieces and the destruction and whatever havoc has caused.
So, there's another one that I actually use in it, and it's kind of in line with the whole juice boxes in the refrigerator. And it's not necessarily when I'm involved directly in a conflict, and sometimes it is, but it's joking during a confrontation. A good joke will, again, change the direction of almost any confrontation. Unless you're ready, unless you're at that point where, it's about to be, you're about to come to blows, it's about to be fisticuffs. A nicely timed joke, again, just redirects everything.
Yes.
You're angry and you're ready to explode, and somebody hits that funny bone, boom.
Yeah, and I have wonderful jokes all the time. So I feel like I could do that one.
That remains to be seen.
I say that because
Judgment is still
disagrees.
Judgment is still out.
He doesn't find me as humorous as I find myself.
That is true, because she's not that funny.
We can take a poll.
Another one that I've seen, and this, I've never had a problem with this, but some people just avoid that whole disagreeing with someone openly. Like, you can say something that just really irritates someone or just burns them up, or they just explode inside. But although they 100% are in the opposite direction of you, they completely disagree with what you just said or what you've just done, they just hold it in.
Yes.
And it's it's not so much the silent treatment. It's just that openly they don't say nothing. Now get them in another room by themselves. They're cussing you out. They're throwing darts at your picture. They might be burning, some, what do they call those things? Those little dolls. When they take them down, the voodoo dolls, they might have a voodoo doll and burning your hair and sticking you with the pin. Yeah.
Yeah. So, different from walking away and such, they just don't even acknowledge that you've upset them in any way, which, I kind of get. I sometimes do that before I walk away. So usually when I go silent, that's usually my indicator. That's my warning light.
Well, the problem with all those, again, is, it's like, imagine, you have this statue, and you have a chisel and a hammer, and as you go through each one of these, and you have each time you have a conflict, there's a little piece that's chipped off, right? It's chipped off. If you don't try to resolve those issues and you keep avoiding them, eventually it's going to be hard to take those little pieces and build back that statue to the way it was before.
Well, it never gets built back the way it was.
It can, if you work on resolving the issue, right? Again, when we talk about conflict, again, conflict is an opportunity for growth, but it's also an opportunity to let what you build fall apart. If you keep running into situations and you don't deal with those situations, again, we talked about the foundation before, it's going to start to crumble.
Yeah.
Or when those cracks come up and you're not repairing them, that water is going to start seeping through them. Before you know it, you got a lot of water in your basement.
Yeah. Well, I think most people don't like conflict, so it's just easier to just avoid it. But you're right. That's not the most healthy adult way of handling it.
Yeah. And I agree that most people don't like conflict, but let's try to think about turning that around, right? And so rather than look to avoid, let's talk about some resolution techniques. And I think one of the big things one of the reasons why I think people kind of avoid confrontation is because they have a hard time understanding or grasping the concept that just because someone disagrees with you, it doesn't mean you're in a fight.
Yes.
You know what I mean? It doesn't mean you're in a situation where, all right, I got to shut down, or, you know what, this is about to get hairy. I'm not going to deal with this.
Yeah. Well, right. A disagreement is definitely different from fighting. I know even in our own home, we tried not to fight in front of the children, but they saw probably plenty of disagreements.
Yeah, we've had disagreements, and I think,
Which is okay.
listen, it took us a while to get on that page where a disagreement wasn't a fight. Yeah, just like anything, the more experience you have at something, the better the opportunity, or the more opportunity you have to learn new ways of dealing with certain things. Again, we're not perfect. I'm close. But as time and experience presented itself, we got better at some of those things.
Right. Practice makes perfect. And sometimes
Practice makes better. Perfection doesn't exist.
Okay.
Practice makes better. That gives you, because there's no perfection, you always have something to strive for.
Yes. But, right. So practice makes better. And at the same time, I think when you start to acknowledge that maybe what you think is a resolution technique is maybe not really a resolution technique, is also prime to help those situations. There's definitely rules to it.
Yeah. And I think I think another technique is this, and it's linked to that first one. You got to focus on dealing with the issue and not avoiding it, right? So when you have that disagreement, sometimes communication just shuts down because you got a disagreement. And that's when it turns into a fight because you're not focusing on the issues. And once you focus, if you can focus on the issues,
yes,
then, you can start to understand where the issue actually lies and what the other person's point of view is compared to yours.
All right. You can't play the blame game, which you've talked about before. You can't keep digging up the past when you've already come to a resolution on some things, That's definitely ways to not go about it.
Yeah.
So you have to focus at what is the issue right now? What is the problem? You can tell your partner how you feel about the issue, but not try to somehow twist it. Again, I think we mentioned it in one of the other ones. It can't be, you did this, so you made me feel this way, because you can't make me feel anyway. I'm the one that feels that way. And hence, it's my reaction maybe to something that you've done, but it wasn't you.
Yeah, and I think
specifically.
And I think part of this is, so we talk about resolution. I think one of the things that we might have skipped over, and I want to go back to is, so we know that there are some avoidance techniques that we use and people use. I think the task is going to be, okay, well, I understand that I use these avoidance techniques. Mm-hmm. How do I get over that? Or how do I recognize when I'm doing that and then redirect that to a resolution? And I think we hit on a couple of those. But I think one way to redirect that, once you recognize that you have the tendency to avoid, is to really think about what it is that you want to actually convey before. It's like one of those things, but think before you speak.
Yep.
You know what I mean? So really taking the time to say, okay, well, before I let my mouth run off, let me think about what it is that's bothering me, or let me think about how I want to actually convey my message. Because now once I think about it, I've had an opportunity to gather my thoughts. I can, you can gain a bit of confidence. And that's the thing, right? Confrontation sometimes can be scary for people. And it's not so much scary that, ooh, I'm afraid, but
anxiety provoking.
Exactly. Anxiety. But once you start thinking about what it is you want to convey, it can build some confidence. And once you have confidence, then, okay, well, this is how I felt. Now I can take how I feel and relay that to my partner so they understand why this was an issue for me or why this was an issue for us.
Yeah. Well, that definitely takes a lot of self-reflection too. So that's definitely something I think a lot of people need to work at as well, because not everybody does it. Not everybody sits there and self-reflects. What could I have done better? In taking responsibility for my actions, my words. That doesn't always happen, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I think it's important for people to understand too that it's okay for them to feel the way they feel, right?
Yes.
We talked about this. When you have a disagreement or you have an argument, you tend to get caught up in I'm right, you're wrong, vice versa.
Right. I'm right.
Well, yeah. And what gets lost is your partner feels a certain way, and that's valid. Whatever reason why they feel that way, that's something different.
Right.
But recognizing that they feel a certain way or recognizing yourself, it's okay to feel the way I feel. Not saying you're right, but it's okay to feel the way I feel. Because then when you understand it's okay to feel this way, now from the perspective of avoiding having a conversation or avoiding conflict, it makes it easier for you to say, okay, well, I need to have this discussion because my feelings are valid.
Yes. Right. Feelings. You can't diminish people's feelings because they're their own. And people will react differently with different feelings based on their life experiences. So you can't take that away from them. Even if you don't quite understand why they feel that way, I think that it's also part of the resolution piece is trying to understand, well, why do you feel this way? Like maybe it's something that they don't even realize of why they really truly feel that way. Well,
and that's perfect too, because as we roll into resolution techniques, right? The first thing is accepting that there actually is an issue. We talked about that whole avoidance technique where you just ignore the actual issue. And I'm not saying this is not what I'm saying is both parties have to accept that there actually is an issue. And then once you accept that there is an issue, okay, well, now there's something that we have to fix. I mean,
right.
You can you can choose to fix it or you can choose to not to fix it. But once you accept there's an issue, now there's something that you have to fix.
Well, right. Well, this conversation is about the healthy way of resolving. Otherwise, it's going to just be avoidance, and nothing ever gets resolved. Right. But, first, acknowledge the issue. Acknowledge that there's a problem. Isn't that like the whole,
you think we're not getting an A. That's a program.
So it has to work, right?
That's a different program. That's a different program. We're getting sidetracked again. But another key,
there's it's well known.
Yeah, you have to acknowledge. It's not just it's acknowledging it, but accepting it. Right? Sometimes people don't want to accept that there's an issue. There's nothing wrong with the way I'm doing things. There's nothing wrong with what I just said. There's nothing wrong with me. You have to accept that there's actually an issue. There's nothing wrong with my relationship. But another key piece to resolving conflict is dealing with it early. And this is why that avoidance technique of, delaying the conversation is not healthy, because when you deal with it early, it's fresh. Right. Sometimes when you have the opportunity to think about, particularly when you're upset, you have the opportunity to think about things, other little pieces that your partner may or may not have done come into mind. Mm-hmm. And now your thought process is filled with something that might have happened 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. But when you deal with it early, the issue is fresh. You are actually in your feelings right then and there. And although it might be explosive, and I don't want to use the term explosive, but I am, because at that time you might be in a heightened state of...
Because I get explosive.
I mean, you said it, not me. You might be in that heightened state of, we'll say, Anxiety will say, you're very upset. But dealing with the issue early is only going to make resolving it much, much easier.
It's not going to compound. I'm not going to sit there in my own head and get upset and more upset and then think about everything else that I'm now upset about for no reason.
Yeah.
That again, that's more compounding,
Yeah. And then when you do deal with the issue early, I think it's easier to really focus on a solution, and that's important to resolving the conflict, right? They say there are three sides to every story.
Yeah.
Your side, my side, and somewhere in the middle. The ideal situation that can come out of a conflict is a solution. There is actually resolution. It's in the word. There's actually a solution that the two parties can come to. And you need to focus on that solution as opposed to, well, you did this.
Right.
I mean, you can air out your
tally.
feelings and say, well, I felt this way, and then acknowledge the way that other person felt. But at some point, you have to focus on a solution.
Yes, definitely. And it has to be a mutual agreed upon solution.
I mean, I thought we could agree to disagree. No, from the perspective of resolving the conflict, as long as there's some compromise, and some compromise might be necessary in there, but as long as you focus on a solution,
Right.
then you'll be in a better place.
Yes, I'll start putting the toilet seat down is a great, solution to.
We're not at that. We're not there. Again, that's a different episode. And I think the other important part about really resolving the conflict is we've talked about this, being honest in your communication, being open in your communication. When a conflict comes up, I think it's important to say how you feel. I mean, you got to say it in a certain manner. I mean, you can't be running around screaming and throwing stuff. I mean, if that's your thing, cool. I mean, your message might not get across, but being open and honest about the issue when you're communicating, that's going to go a long way to help resolve.
Yeah. Right. And then the question is that where the struggle also happens, with people being actually honest with themselves, honest with their partners, it's, they don't want to maybe reignite the disagreement, and maybe people just aren't as honest because of that, because, they're afraid that it's going to continue to downfall or something and spiral out of control.
I think a big part of that is, you have to understand that you have to understand that your partner, your significant other, feels a certain way about an issue.
Mm-hmm.
And once you have that understanding, I mean, you can choose to do what you want to do once you have that understanding. But from my perspective, once you have that understanding, then if you really care about that person, again, you understand or you care that they have feelings, and those feelings are then validated, not just within them, regardless of how you got to that point, knowing that they have these feelings.
Yes.
You have the opportunity to choose to do something about those feelings.
Yes. Well, to the point that we said before, you never want to discount somebody's feelings.
Yeah.
So then at that point, it's understanding the feelings, and then, like you said, working towards a solution to where, it's not going to reignite. It's not going to be a constant disagreement over and over if you actually come to a good quality solution.
Yeah. And that's why, from my perspective, when it comes to conflict avoidance versus resolution, although nobody's perfect and not every time you're going to hit on right on getting to that resolution, resolution provides the opportunity again. Well, conflict provides the opportunity for you to grow, but resolution is going to, it can actually make your relationship stronger because you work through these things. And now because you've gone and worked through these things, you gain that experience, and that experience will serve you better the next time it comes around. So Earlier we talked about some avoidance techniques, recognizing those. We talked about some ways to try to change the mindset of once you notice that you're starting to get involved, not get involved, you're starting to use some of those avoidance techniques when you get into conflict. And then we talked about how to really work towards resolving those conflicts. Avoiding conflict can negatively affect a relationship. The techniques, resolution techniques, can really help to keep your relationship strong. It can help keep your relationship afloat. And I think that's the best way to proceed.
Well, yeah, definitely. Because just because you're avoiding something, the issue is always going to remain there. It's always going to be underneath the surface somewhere if you never resolve it. So you need to resolve it. And it shows commitment in the relationship because you're not giving up because now you're disagreeing and you're able to work through the issue and come to some type of resolution. And, it makes you stronger, like you said.
So it sounds like we are actually in agreement. When it comes to conflict avoidance versus resolution, we choose the path of resolution. And with that, that's it for this week's episode. Next week, join us. We'll be discussing growing together and not apart. Remember, you can subscribe to this podcast on your favorite podcast app. Also, follow us and leave feedback at Lunch with Sandy on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Thanks for listening.
That's it for this week's episode of the Lunch with Sandy podcast. Thanks for listening. We'd love to hear your feedback and comments on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter at Lunch with Sandy. And be sure to follow us on your favorite podcast app. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to rate and review us. Thanks again for listening to the Lunch with Sandy podcast.